So what I'll be discussing today is a paper on how to design optimal contracts when there are peer effects in firms, for instance. So you might think of a situation in which workers in a firm are exerting effort in order to generate some output, and that they reinforce each other through some spillover structures. So for instance, the fact that you work harder might make those around you work harder as well. And so the firm, knowing this, might want to design contracts in order to leverage the structure, the spillover structure, across workers. And so that's what we study in this paper. We think about what is the profit maximizing contract that a firm would want to design as a function of the sort of existing structure of externalities, bilateral externalities, which we model as a network, a firm network of spillovers. And what we find is that actually, in relation to kind of the literature and networks that we know how to kind of intervene in graphs and how to think about optimal interventions, here we find that once you think about the firm's profit function and you think about the effect that wages have both on the marginal revenues but also on the marginal cost of firms, then the conclusion is actually a bit different than what we would normally think about in these other more standard network models. Because it is no longer the case that you simply want to kind of just target the most central worker and just give incentives to those that have larger centrality. And by larger centrality, I mean the ability to generate effects both directly and indirectly on others and rippling through the organization. Instead, what we find is that although the marginal revenues do scale with the centrality measures, the marginal cost structure is a bit more nuanced. And in fact, when you look at how increasing, let's say, the performance pay, the stock options, say, that you want to give a worker, that is not just going to motivate that worker and make others work harder, it's also going to change the costs of the firm, because it's going to force the firm to have to pay sort of higher compensations for workers that are now exerting more effort. And so we kind of solve out for that nuanced problem and find that indeed the optimal contract and how steep incentives should be for each worker is not just a measure of that worker's centrality, but an actual measure of everyone's centrality. And we tell you exactly how you have to combine every worker's centrality in order to arrive at this measure of performance-based compensation. And so that's basically the paper. And then what we do is we also look at how these incentive allocation rules change when the technology of the firm varies. So for instance, we look at a scenario in which with what we call modular production, which the firm's technology is very non-linear. So you can think of this as different groups within the firm creating different parts of, say, like an airplane wing, right? Mm-hmm. Every part has to work for the airplane wing to work. And so that's a very non-linear production technology where every group is essential, right? And now how you allocate incentives is going to look very different than what it looked like before, what I just explained before, which was the case of a linear technology in which everyone's output mattered the same. And here actually what we find is that you don't want to allocate incentives as a function of this measure of everyone's centrality, but you want to kind of look at the weakest link kind of scenario, so things become much more defensive rather than diffusive. And so now you want to think about allocating incentives to those teams that have a larger per worker cost of exerting this level, this minimal quota that they have to exert for the wing to be completed. And so we find that the allocation rule looks very different then, right? And we do other things like thinking about institutional constraints, whereby firms maybe can't fully wage discriminate across all workers, and for institutional reasons have to kind of assign the same salary to entire blocks of the workforce. And we also think about what that does to profits and surplus, etc.